Hello, welcome once again to Leto's Law. I'm Steve Leto. We're on a theme lately, talking about parking again. This time it's out of Chicago. And I got to thank Steve. Steve has now sent me a couple stories in the last week that I've used for topics on Leto's Law. I'm tempted to hire you as a producer because you obviously have a good eye for the things I look for. But Steve sent me the story, and it's from reason.com. And it's about how Chicago impounds innocent people's cars and then soaks them in fines. And so now Chicago is being sued over the practice. And it's going to get ugly depending on how long this goes. We don't know how ugly or how ugly for whom. But following a recent investigation into Chicago's punitive vehicle impound program, a new lawsuit alleges the practice violates the constitutional rights of people in Chicago. And many cities have got towing situations that are ugly. The city of Detroit for years has allowed renegade tow truck drivers to do all kinds of crazy stuff. There are allegations of kickbacks, there's allegations of people whose cars were towed for no reason, and they can't get them back without paying some insane towing fees and some insane storage charges. And the funny thing is, I've mentioned before that I drove a tow truck when I was in high school and right out of high school for the city of Birmingham, Michigan, and we had the contract for the city of Birmingham. We traded it on and off with another gas station. And so if I was at an accident scene and there's a car there and I towed it, I'd give them a business card and say, here's where your car is being towed if it was coming to the gas station. Or else I'd tow it to the impound yard if the city of Birmingham had an interest in it for some reason. And most of the time, the people would come pick their car up within a couple days or have it towed away in a couple days, and insurance would take care of it or whatever. But it wasn't that expensive. It wasn't like a huge money maker for the gas station. In fact, I believe they made more money off the tow than they did off the storage for the most part. But I guess we hadn't figured out the scam just yet. So, what's going on in Chicago is that Chicago impounds thousands of cars a year, including cars owned by people who have never committed a crime, and forces them through an expensive bureaucratic maze to get their car back. This process violates residents' constitutional rights, according to a new lawsuit filed against the city this past week. The Institute for Justice filed a class action lawsuit in Illinois, alleging that Chicago's impound program violates residents' guarantee of due process, as well as protections against excessive fines and unreasonable seizures under both the state and the U.S. constitutions. Owners find themselves in a labyrinthine impound system that is plagued by serious procedural flaws, the suit says. Even innocent owners get caught up in this system, facing hefty fines and fees when someone else used their car, for instance, to commit a crime without the car owner's knowledge. And we talked about this before. There's a case out of Michigan, in fact, where a man committed a crime in a car. I believe he solicited a prostitute. I could be wrong on that. But his wife owned the car, but the car was seized. And she tried to get it back, saying, hey, look, I'm innocent, and I'm the owner of the car. And the state of Michigan says, well, no, but the car's not innocent. And this is, in essence, a civil asset forfeiture. And that was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. So the property can be guilty, even if the owner is not, which is a really strange concept. And most people have a hard time wrapping their heads around that, including myself. I think it's insane. A recent investigation published last year described how Chicago's punitive impound program soaks people in fines and fees and deprives them indefinitely of their transportation, whether or not they actually committed a crime. And this is probably an effort to help reduce the massive annual budget deficits of the city of Chicago. It also operates independently from the state's courts, meaning that even in cases where a defendant beats a criminal charge and a civil asset forfeiture case, they can still be found liable for thousands of dollars in fines and storage fees and have their cars held until they pay or relinquish them to the city. So the city will often say, well, if you don't want to pay it, just let us keep your car. Oh, how nice of you. And for an example, Spencer Bird is a 51-year-old resident of Harvey, Illinois. His impound case was featured by Reason. Bird is now a named plaintiff in the Institute for Justice lawsuit. He's a part-time auto mechanic. He says he's giving a client a lift in his 1996 Cadillac DeVille one evening in June of 2016 when he's pulled over by Chicago police and searched. He had nothing on him, had broken no laws, and was not arrested, but his passenger, who he had just met recently, had heroin in his pocket. The police released Bird without charging him with a crime, but they seized his car. And here's the funny thing, a fight broke out over who got to keep the car, whether it was the county of Cook or the city of Chicago. I want his car. No, I want his car. And you have people fighting over something they don't own. Meanwhile, Bird's been fighting for 3 years to try to get the car back. A state judge ordered Bird's car released after he filed a financial hardship motion, but the city refused to return it, claiming he owed money under the city's municipal code. They don't have to listen to any stinking judge. What's a judge got? Even after a state judge declared Bird innocent in the civil forfeiture case against his Cadillac in Illinois State Court, he was still found liable for violating Chicago's municipal code in the city's Administrative Hearings Court, which has a lower standard of evidence, obviously, and almost no procedural protections for defendants. I mean, what's procedure, right? In the meantime, Bird's livelihood has suffered. His primary trade is also carpentry, so his tools have been locked in the car since it was impounded. The city has refused to let him retrieve them or his car until he pays the accumulated fines and fees, which right now are about $17,000, probably 3 or 4 times what that car is worth. So Bird told Reason, "If you do wrong, fine, but I didn't do anything wrong. I should have had my car released to me with no fines or anything. Thank you, sorry for the inconvenience, and I'm on my merry way." And instead of trying to get some type of revenue from me, I was proven innocent and they still didn't want to act right. And that, of course, is the problem. This is all about revenue generation. And once they've got the spigot flowing with money, it's hard to get them to turn it off, even if they're clearly violating all kinds of laws. A WBEZ analysis of Chicago's massive impound program found that in 2017, 1 year, the city impounded more than 22,000 cars for violations of municipal codes, which include dozens of impoundable offenses ranging from drug possession to drag racing to having illegal fireworks. The fines for these violations are steep, ranging from $500 to $3,000, figures that don't include towing and storage fees, which accumulate at $20 a day for the first 5 and $35 a day every day after that. Given that these cases can take weeks, if not months, to wind through the system, the fees can often exceed the fines themselves. And obviously, they'll often exceed the value of the car. An analysis of data from the Chicago Administrative Hearings Department showed Chicago fined motorists $17 million over a 12-month period between 2017 and 2018. About $10 million of those fines were for driving on a suspended license, and more than $3 million for drug offenses like the one that resulted in the impoundment of Bird's car. And again, remember, Bird had no drugs on him. His passenger did. Chicago can also hold seized cars indefinitely. There's no statute of limitations on impound fines and fees in Chicago. That debt can follow you for the rest of your life. Chicago's impound racket is both easy to be ensnared in and hard to escape. There are only 3 narrow defenses for those whose cars are impounded, and being innocent is not a defense. You're talking about a lot of money for something that you may not have been responsible for, says attorney Diana Simpson. The lack of an innocent owner protection really violates 2 different kinds of constitutional protections, both the excessive fines and fees protections as well as due process. Yeah, what kind of due process is that? Is you're innocent but you're being punished? I mean, what's sad about the situation is that most people from the age of about 3 have a grasp of right and wrong that would indicate to them that this is wrong. And yet you've got grown people, politicians, judges, cops, administrative hearing officers, people who write municipal codes, who are all standing around going, what? What's wrong? No, there's nothing wrong with this. Look at all the money we're making. And that's that's the equation. It's not wrong. Look at the money we're making. Because if someone took their car and refused to give it back because a passenger did something wrong, or what, of course they'd freak out. And this is one of the biggest problems in our culture. It's bigger than the law. It's bigger than the legal system. Is that many people don't care about something as long as it doesn't affect them. They go, so this guy gave a ride to some guy with heroin in his pocket. He deserves what he got. Yeah, if it happened to you, where you gave somebody a ride as a good Samaritan, and next thing you know, you're losing your car over it, yeah, you'd probably feel a little differently about it, you know? It's been a while since I've picked up a hitchhiker. It's been a long time since I've seen a hitchhiker. But I'm just letting you know, I've picked up a hitchhiker. But I saw someone walking down the road. I pulled over. Do you need a ride? I gave him a ride. Seeing stories like this, I think, you know, I probably shouldn't do that. I probably shouldn't ever give strangers rides. You know? Or I go to pick somebody up and they go, hey, do you mind if my friend comes along? I'm sorry, I can't let your friend get in the car because I might lose my car in a civil asset forfeiture case if your friend's got heroin in his pocket. Okay, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. So this is a major, major problem. They need to find out who all the people are behind this program and chase them from office with pointy sticks, figuratively. The other two named plaintiffs in the Institute for Justice lawsuit, Jerome Davis and Veronica Walker Davis, exemplify what critics say is the procedural nightmare people face when their cars are impounded in Chicago. In May of last year, the couple dropped their Lexus off at a Chicago body shop following an accident. When the repairs dragged on for longer than expected, the shop first said it was waiting for parts. Eventually, the couple learned the truth. An employee of the shop had driven their car on a suspended license and was pulled over. Their Lexus was now sitting at one of Chicago's impound lots. They had nothing to do with it. The city never informed the couple that their car had been impounded, and Veronica Walker Davis had to travel in person to the city's administrative hearings building to request a hearing to fight the impoundment that she had nothing to do with. I'm thinking I'm just going to go and give a statement and show proof that my car wasn't in my possession, everything will be okay, but it turned into a nightmare. She said it felt pretty much like Twilight Zone. So Twilight Zone, or Room 110 in Chicago's Administrative Hearings Building, a small courtroom where the city churns through its impound cases at a rate of roughly one every 10 minutes, 5 days a week. The hearings are civil matters, not criminal, so there's no right to a lawyer. And Walker Davis found herself standing across from a lawyer for the city of Chicago. She tried to explain to the administrative hearing judge what had happened, but it made no difference. She was found liable for violating the city code and would have to pay nearly $2,500 to get her car out of impound. And again, she had nothing to do with why it was impounded. She says, I felt like a criminal. In late March of this year, the couple managed to find a pro bono lawyer and negotiate their fine down to $1,100. But when they arrived with cash in hand, they were told the registration on their car had lapsed while the car was sitting in the lot, and the city would not release it without a current registration. See, they're very sticklers about the law. So you got to follow the law very carefully. They're not going to let you break the law while they're stealing from you. Walker Davis rushed the next day to get the registration renewed, which cost another $101, and got the city to agree to extend the deadline for the couple to pay their impound fines. In an email provided to Reason, a lawyer for Chicago's law department wrote to the couple, the city will agree to extend the time for you to pay the settlement agreement to April 12th. But when the couple showed up to retrieve the car on April 10th, it was gone. The city had sold the car off. According to WBEZ, Chicago sells many of the cars at impounds for amounts under $200, and almost all of them are sold to a single towing contractor. Oh, gee, isn't that funny? The cars are sold for below market value to a favored vendor of the city. I hope I don't have to be the one who points this out to any of the prosecutors in Cook County. But you might want to look at the relationship between the one vendor who buys the cars for $200 and the person selling the cars on behalf of the city or whoever it is that has these cars, and what that relationship is. Because in most settings, when vehicles are sold at auction to pay off fines and costs, they're required to sell them in an arm's length transaction in an attempt to get the highest value they possibly can for the products being auctioned. So they're selling them for below value. Number one, they're probably violating the common law. But number two, the only reason you do something stupid like that is if someone's paying you. Okay? And I shouldn't have to be the one who points this out. I hope it's already occurred to somebody. I hope they're already doing an undercover investigation. But if they're not, they should start one yesterday. The Institute for Justice is hoping that a recent Supreme Court case will bolster the claim that Chicago's impound program fines are so excessive that it affords them few avenues of escape, and therefore it violates the Constitution. And they're, of course, talking about the case of Timms versus Indiana. I've done a video on that. And that's the case of the Indiana man who lost his $42,000 Land Rover, and they seized it in a drug felony case, and they called it a fine. And the U.S. Supreme Court says, well, that was an excessive fine. They did not address civil asset forfeiture, however, and that's a problem. In 2017, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down Los Angeles' automatic 30-day impound law, ruling that it amounted to an unconstitutional seizure under the Fourth Amendment. While state and federal courts have repeatedly upheld Chicago's impound program in the past, the Institute for Justice hopes that it can build on the recent Supreme Court decision as well as other cases that have addressed the government's use of fines and fees to generate revenue. We think we've got a really great chance, and we think the courts will agree with us that the system is just too much. It's bringing in an entirely huge amount of money for the city of Chicago. There's 22,000 cars a year that go through the system, and that's not the role of the government to be creating revenue this way. And that's somebody from Reason talking there with the quote about the role of the government, and that's my editorializing about them making money this way. Like I said, they've created a cash system where they can seize people's cars and then wring money out of the car owners. And it's really, really hard to get the government to shut down a stream of revenue. But when they're robbing people, okay, the stream of revenue needs to be shut down. It's pretty straightforward. So I hope this lawsuit proceeds. I hope there are some changes to the way they conduct business in Chicago. And I hope that if, in fact, there is anybody doing anything untoward when it comes with respect to the law, I hope that they get caught and I hope they get prosecuted to the full extent of the law, because it certainly looks like something bad is happening in Chicago, especially at the auctions, where the cars are being auctioned for under $200 to one vendor. Crazy how that works, right? Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.